Lexus is one of the few luxury brands that never stopped caring about reliability, even now. While others add complexity, Lexus keeps using proven engines and transmissions that age slowly and break less. That's why some modern Lexus models are still cars you can buy once and keep for the long haul. When Lexus introduced the Lexus LX 570, it wasn't chasing trends. The model traces its roots back to the mid-1990s, when Lexus decided it wanted a luxury SUV that didn't compromise the toughness of the Toyota Land Cruiser platform. By the time the LX 570 arrived in the late 2000s, Lexus leaned fully into that philosophy, pairing a full-size body-on-frame chassis with a naturally aspirated 5.7-liter V8. In an era when turbocharging was already becoming popular, that choice alone tells you how conservative Lexus engineering really is. Mechanics tend to describe the LX 570 with a tone of respect you don't often hear from modern luxury vehicles. The engine, known in the shop world for its durability, makes roughly 380 horsepower and is paired to a traditional automatic transmission that avoids the complexity of dual-clutch or early experimental gearboxes. Techs often say this drivetrain is understressed, meaning it's not working anywhere near its limits in daily driving. That's a big reason these SUVs quietly rack up high mileage with few internal engine issues. Ownership stories usually sound similar. People buy them used, sometimes with well over 100,000 miles, and expect problems that simply never show up. The issues mechanics do mention are rarely catastrophic, things like cooling components, suspension bushings, or starter motors that eventually wear out because this is a heavy, 7-passenger SUV. None of those are design failures. They're the cost of mass and age. Fuel economy is the obvious trade-off. Real-world driving usually lands in the mid-teens, and no mechanic will pretend otherwise. But buyers who choose an LX 570 aren't chasing efficiency. They're buying something that feels overbuilt, quiet, and strangely timeless. That's why the LX 570 has become one of those rare modern SUVs that mechanics don't warn you away from. It's expensive to buy, expensive to fuel, but remarkably calm about aging, exactly what lifetime ownership tends to look like. The LX 570 survives by being big and old school. The next one survives for the opposite reason. It's one of the last Lexus cars built before everything got complicated. The Lexus IS 500 exists because Lexus knew something important was ending. The IS name itself goes back to the late 1990s, when Lexus wanted a compact sports sedan to rival the German brands without inheriting their long-term headaches. Over the years, the IS evolved quietly, but the IS 500 is different. It showed up in the early 2020s as a kind of last stand. A compact luxury sedan with a naturally aspirated 5.0-liter V8 at a time when almost everyone else had already downsized or gone turbo. From a mechanical standpoint, this car makes old-school technicians smile. The engine is a direct descendant of Lexus V8 architecture that has already proven itself in larger models. It produces just under 500 horsepower, but more importantly, it does so without forced induction. Mechanics often point out that fewer heat-soaked components and lower internal stress usually translate into longer engine life, especially for owners who don't abuse cold starts or stretch oil changes. In the shop, the IS 500 is often described as refreshingly simple for a modern performance car. The automatic transmission is a conventional unit, not a dual-clutch experiment, and the electronics are far less invasive than what you find in comparable European sedans. That simplicity matters over time. Techs regularly warn buyers that many high-output turbo cars age poorly once warranties expire, but the IS 500 doesn't raise those same red flags. Real-world fuel economy is predictable. Owners report low 20s on the highway if driven calmly, dipping into the mid-teens when the V8 is enjoyed properly. Nobody buying this car expects efficiency, they expect consistency, and that's exactly what it delivers. The IS 500 isn't just fast for its size, it represents the end of a philosophy. A small luxury sedan, big engine, proven parts, and minimal drama that you can grab for high 50s on the average. Mechanics don't call it exciting to work on, and that's actually the highest compliment you can give a car meant to last decades. And the next Lexus on this list goes even further in the opposite direction, smaller, simpler, and designed for people who value longevity over speed. Quick pause for a second. If this is already changing how you look at the used market, tap like so YouTube knows this isn't clickbait. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this without the hype. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Different markets tell very different stories. The Lexus NX 300 was born at a moment when Lexus realized something had shifted. Buyers still wanted luxury, but they no longer wanted big, heavy SUVs with intimidating ownership costs. Introduced in the mid-2010s, the NX became Lexus's answer to compact crossovers that felt modern without abandoning the brand's reliability-first mindset. It wasn't meant to be exciting. It was meant to last. Mechanics usually describe the NX 300 as quietly durable. Under the hood sits a 2.0-liter turbocharged four-cylinder paired to a traditional automatic transmission. On paper, turbocharging sounds like a risk, but this engine is tuned conservatively, making just under 240 horsepower. Techs often point out that Lexus avoided pushing boost or squeezing out headline numbers, which keeps internal stress low. In real shops, that shows up as fewer engine failures and very predictable maintenance patterns. Ownership stories back that up. Many NX models rack up high mileage with little more than routine service. The most common mechanical complaints mechanics mention aren't catastrophic: carbon buildup on direct injection engines over time, occasional suspension wear, and electronic annoyances rather than drivetrain failures. In other words, normal aging, not design mistakes. A common buyer mistake is skipping oil changes because the engine feels fine, which mechanics warn against on any turbo motor meant for long life. Fuel economy is one of the NX's quiet strengths. Real-world driving often lands in the mid-20s combined, sometimes pushing close to 30 on the highway if driven calmly. That balance between efficiency and durability is why many long-term owners keep them far longer than planned. On the North American used market, a clean NX 300 typically trades between the high 20s and low 30s, depending on mileage and trim. It's not cheap, but mechanics will tell you it's far less expensive than replacing a problem-ridden European alternative. The NX 300 doesn't impress with drama. It earns loyalty by never demanding attention, and that's exactly why the next Lexus on this list goes even simpler, aiming at buyers who want longevity above everything else. The Lexus UX 200 exists because Lexus saw where the market was heading long before most buyers did. By the late 2010s, cities were getting tighter, commutes shorter, and ownership priorities were changing. The UX line was introduced as the smallest Lexus crossover ever built, sitting below the NX, and it carried a very intentional message. This wasn't about power or presence, it was about simplicity, efficiency, and long-term livability. Mechanics tend to like the UX 200 for a reason that doesn't sound exciting, but absolutely matters. Under the hood is a naturally aspirated 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine paired with a continuously variable transmission. On paper, that combination scares some buyers. In practice, techs often say this is one of the least stressed powertrains Lexus currently sells. With output just under 170 horsepower, nothing is being pushed hard. That's exactly what longevity looks like in the real world. In independent shops, the UX rarely shows up with serious complaints. Mechanics usually see routine maintenance, brake service, and suspension wear long before anything engine-related. The most common warnings are buyer-related mistakes: skipping fluid changes because the car feels appliance-like, or assuming a CVT means zero maintenance. Lexus tuned this transmission conservatively, and when serviced properly, it has shown far fewer failures than early CVTs from other brands. Fuel economy is where the UX quietly wins. Real-world driving often lands in the high 20s combined, with low 30s on the highway being realistic. For buyers who want a luxury badge without luxury fuel bills, that matters more than horsepower numbers. On the used North American market, UX 200 models typically sit in the low to mid-20s, depending on mileage and condition. Mechanics often point out that this is one of the cheapest long-term ownership plays in the Lexus lineup. The UX 200 isn't built to impress your neighbors. It's built to disappear into daily life and then still be there, years later. And the next Lexus proves that longevity doesn't always mean small or slow. Sometimes it means finding the sweet spot in the middle. Lexus didn't create the Lexus RC 350 to chase volume. This car exists because the brand still believed there was room for a traditional luxury coupe in a market drifting toward crossovers. The RC name appeared in the mid-2010s, positioned as a more emotional alternative to the IS sedan, borrowing proven components from multiple Lexus platforms rather than inventing anything new. That parts-bin approach was intentional, and it shows up clearly in long-term ownership. Mechanics often describe the RC 350 as old Lexus in a new shape. Power comes from a naturally aspirated 3.5-liter V6, producing just over 300 horsepower, paired with a conventional automatic transmission. No turbochargers, no exotic cooling tricks, no experimental gearboxes. Techs like to point out that this V6 has been around in various forms for years, which means most of its weaknesses are already known and largely addressed. Timing components, fuel systems, and internal engine parts are rarely the reason these cars visit a shop. Where mechanics do raise flags is weight. This is not a light coupe. and suspension components, brakes, and tires wear accordingly. That's not a flaw, just physics. Another common buyer mistake is assuming it's a hardcore sports car and driving it like one every day. Treated as a grand tourer instead of a track toy, the RC ages far more gracefully. Fuel economy reflects that balance. Real-world driving usually lands in the low 20s combined, with highway numbers climbing into the mid-20s if driven calmly. Owners who want efficiency first usually look elsewhere, but buyers who want a dependable, comfortable coupe tend to accept the trade-off. On the North American used market, RC350 models typically sell in the mid-20s to low 30s, depending on mileage and year. Mechanics often note that depreciation hits early, then flattens, exactly what long-term buyers want. RC350 isn't flashy, fast-aging luxury. It's a reminder that conservative engineering still has a place in emotional cars. If you look closely at every car on this list, there's a pattern Lexus never advertises. None of these models chase extremes. No fragile innovation, no first-year experiments. Just proven engines, conservative tuning, and parts that were designed to survive abuse, neglect, and time. That's why lifetime ownership still exists in the 2020s. Not because cars got better, but because a few brands refused to get reckless. Lexus didn't build these models to impress you for 5 years. They built them to still make sense after 10, 15, even 20 years, when the screens feel outdated, but the car still starts, drives straight, and doesn't ask for forgiveness. If you buy right, maintain normally, and avoid the usual buyer mistakes, these aren't just good used cars. They're exits from the endless upgrade cycle. And if that's how you think about cars, you're in the right place.